We want to help you be the very best missionary so that you can give your very best to the people you're serving. What makes this podcast unique is it's done by missionaries for missionaries. How can we take timeless principles and apply them to our lives as missionaries? That's really our heart behind this. Welcome to this episode of the Modern Day Missionaries podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have Michael Pollock with us. Michael is a well-known expert in the care of TCKs, which is Third Cultures kids, and he's a coach and consultant, the founding executive director of Daraja, which serves cross-cultural and highly mobile families. And he's also the co-author of the third edition of Third Culture Kids, which, if you haven't read it, is the book on understanding TCKs. I have the second edition in hard copy, and I've got the third edition in digital. And Michael, I hope there is a fourth edition coming out at some point with all the changes going on in this world.
There's a lot. And actually, yes, Ruth Van Rieken and I have been working toward that for a year now. We're trying to get some research settled and some things to really make it ready and right for the fourth edition. So yes.
Yeah, because there's so much changing in this world, not only generationally, but globally. I mean, so it's going to be fantastic. I've read this more than once, and it is the authority. So pick that up, everybody who's listening, if you haven't yet. And Michael, we connected last year when I attended a workshop that you gave on TCKs, and you so kindly let me pick your brain about my family's experience, me being married to an adult TCK, and then having two daughters who are TCKs. And I was intrigued by your own fascinating story that I think people are really going to love and connect with. And then you've got some great practical advice for anybody who lives abroad. And I know you and I were just talking before we got started. There are a lot of families who are traveling back to their passport country, I think more often. There still are the people who do the 2 and the 4-year furloughs, but there are a lot who are making more frequent visits. And so we're going to kind of delve into that today. What does it look like to go, quote, home? And I say quote home because, as you and I know, and everybody listening, home is a loaded word. So we're going to talk about preparing emotionally and mentally for a successful trip back, quote, home. But before we jump into our talk, I want to shoot a few rapid fire questions your way just to get us going. So
Okay.
I did not tell you we're going to do this, but we're going to do this and it's going to be great. I know you're prepared for anything. You were telling me there's a bear that's been wandering around your house. So if you're prepared for a bear, I mean, you got this.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Michael, mountain, forest, jungle, or beach?
Mountain.
Mountain. Okay, what is the most unusual food you've ever eaten?
Ooh. There's one I can't translate the Chinese here on this podcast because it's just shocking. I have I drank blood with Maasai, and that was different.
Wow. Yeah, you beat whatever I was going to say. So that's
It's not leveling up. It's just that was an unusual experience.
yes. Oh my goodness, for
It
sure.
wasn't bad, actually. It was irony.
Wow. Okay. What is your best travel tip?
Oh goodness. Travel light. I learned that from my Chinese colleagues. The way that they travel light it's amazing. It just makes things easier.
Absolutely. Okay. What is your favorite song from your teenage years that you still rock out to when nobody else is listening?
Wow. From my teenage years, I listened to a lot of Phil Collins in the 80s. And I think there's so many. Susudio, that was a good, bopping song. On the Dark Side, was In the Air Tonight. Um, but when you had someone you just weren't sure how the relationship was gonna go. Yeah.
Yeah, he still moves your soul when you put that song on. Michael, give us a quick background on how and where you grew up.
So I was born on Long Island. My dad was doing youth work in New York City. Then he took a pastor in New Jersey. So that was the next 7 years. I left on Long Island when I was 6 months old. That's why I didn't pick up the accent. And then Vermont for a couple of years, then Kenya for 3, back to a different place in Vermont, southern Vermont, where I went to high school. And my dad was running Interaction. And then when I went to college, my parents also went to college with me because after I had been accepted, the Houghton University offered my dad a position. And he did talk to me about it. Like, what do you say? Like, yeah, no, it's okay. Sure. Yeah, you can come to college with
Dad, I
me.
would love for you to come to college with me as I try to become independent.
And it turned out to be really cool. It was actually um and um so from let's see, Houghton, I'm married my college sweetheart. She was born in Sierra Leone, but grew up in Iowa, mostly Iowa. And as you do. And then we went to Baltimore, and we were going to be there for a couple of years while I taught. Um, and we started having kids, and so we had 2 kids, and we were planning to go overseas. That was our plan together. So 12 years later, there's a bunch of things that happened in there, including helping to start a school. Um, we 12 years after that, we headed to Asia, and we thought we were heading to Thailand for about a whole year, and then God shut that door and opened another one. We wound up in Tianjin, China. So we were in Tianjin for 9 years. Um, we adopted our third child there, and my wife was doing volunteering at a local orphanage, and so we met Roanna, and we were able to adopt her, and then 9 years later, we came back to the States for several different reasons, aging parents, some health things. Our kids, our middle child, then heading into college. And we were in Maryland for a year. And while we looked for a place to start Daraja, and then uh, landed in Michigan on the shores of Lake Michigan in Muskegon. And 2 years ago, we moved to Greensboro, where my wife is doing she's a paralegal for refugee immigrant families.
Oh my goodness. You did a very good job of summarizing that because that's a lot of story. And everybody listening knows there is so much behind those simple words you just said.
Well, and then 2 weeks ago, we moved to Asheville. So yeah, so we're in a new house. I was saying before, we're right actually in a log cabin in Asheville.
Hence the black bears that could potentially pop in at any moment.
That's true.
Oh my word. So you grew up a TCK and then your family moved abroad. So your kids grew up as TCKs. And now you got a bunch of ATCKs. For people who don't know the terminology, adult
So
TCKs. But this and then your dad wrote the first and second edition with Ruth of that book and then you hopped into the third edition. Is that right?
yeah, my dad and Ruth wrote the first edition, and then my
Mhm.
dad passed away in 2004. So that was at the end of our first year in China. And so there's a lot of adjustment with that. And then Ruth wrote the next one where she introduced her CCK model.
Yeah.
And when we came back from China, um, I began working with groups like Families in Global Transition, et cetera, and Barnabas International and others. And she said, you have models and you have experience in this. Would you like to be on the crew for the third edition? So that was the third one was published in 2017.
Which had a lot of changes to it too, because again, like we just keep saying, things keep changing and evolving, and it feels like the rate at which that's happening is a lot sooner. So I love that you keep it current, and that's what you do through Daraja is you do consulting and coaching in helping people and organizations with TCK type issues, which is amazing because again, this is my world. I know them. They're an interesting, fascinating group of people. So kind of in light of all that, thinking through these TCK things, you and I were saying that with people going back to the States. And maybe it's going back to the States, maybe it's going back to their passport country, because I know at modern day we have missionaries from all over to all over. The bulk would be in North America. But there is this all these feelings that you have when you think you're gonna go back to your passport country. There's a party that feels excited because you get to eat food you haven't eaten in a while, see people you haven't seen in a while. There's nerves about all the supporters you need to meet with, how your kids are gonna react. It's a really emotional thing. I remember the first time we were gonna go back, I couldn't sleep for probably 6 weeks leading up to it, if not longer, with all the nerves. And I don't know how it is for each person, but let's just talk for a little bit about what that looks like, that re-entry shock, when someone goes back for a visit, whether they go back for furlough or to move back there. What are some of the things that you think catch people most off guard?
Mm. Yeah, I for this portion, the question that you asked, I just written the word expectations
Mm.
because, often the big shocks come when our expectations are not met, or on the plus side, when they're super exceeded. We say, "Oh, I had no idea it was gonna be this great." Um, and so, both of those happen. And it can be very difficult, to how do you adjust expectations for things you haven't experienced before? And so that's where leaning into folks who've done it before, networks on we say on both sides of the pond, in your host country and in your passport country, and and doing some work to one prepare yourself and your family for the process of moving, and that's the process of disengaging and leaving, and then doing some thinking ahead process for, where are we going to land? What will it look like? What are some reasonable expectations?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting. I had talked about people returning to their passport country, but when I think about it, it really could be on the flip side as well. Cause like for our family 2 years ago, we relocated back to the States, which is now our base. And I remember for the first time we went back, oh gosh, was it a year ago? Back to Peru where we had lived for 10 years. And it was the reverse process. And suddenly I was going back to what I felt was home.
Yeah.
And it was and it wasn't.
Uh,
And to your point, the expectations that you have can really throw you off. And I don't know that there's really a way to have these perfectly correct expectations when we talk about the mental, the emotional aspect, because you don't really know how people are gonna react to you. You don't know how you're gonna feel. Um, so how could somebody prepare as best as they can with getting right expectations?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's right, and even some things that are reasonable expectations may not actually come to pass. So that, yeah, and
True.
be hard. And in some ways, that's the nature of life. How much of life is predictable? We like to think, especially in the West, that we can control it and we can plan it and we can have it walk, along its trail, just as we want to, or stay on the tracks that we planned out. But how often does it actually happen? So it's a human experience, and a big concept to I think in the third culture world to grab a hold of is that change happens. Change happens to everyone, internal, external, and um, or in a third culture world where you're crossing cultures and there's this high, mobility, this disruption, these life disruptions that change just comes a lot faster. It's often we talk about, the losses can be vast. Yeah, if you're in Peru and you have a way of life and you have things your family does and you're feeling at home, and then suddenly, a quick plane ride later, maybe some train and some taxi in there, but you're in a new culture, in a new setting, your practices, your language, all these things are different. Um, how how do you adapt to that change? So transition, we say, is the process of adapting to the change. And so there are some specific things that can be done. And the first is settling the things in your own self that you can take care of. And the biggest, research has shown this for a long time, is to do whatever you can to make sure that your interpersonal relationships are in a good place, as 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 fine a job as you can possibly do. Because when you travel, between places, and you leave a place, it's easy to think that, hey, I've had these conflicts, I've had these, issues over here, and but you know what? Oh, I'm leaving, and I don't have to do the community work of putting things right. And one way to think about that is it's kind of like sticking a fish, maybe even a frozen fish, in your backpack. It may be okay for a while, but eventually it's going to stink, and it's going to impact the people around you as well. So that's the first. And the model that my dad created while he and my mom were working in Kenya is called the RAFT. So because it's RAFT, it's it's a fairly ubiquitous kind of tool. There are people who haven't heard of it. I would just say this for those listening who are like just rolled their eyes. There are places in communities where the RAFT teaching gets overdone, so you're almost inoculated against it, and it's really solid if you practice it. So it's not so much about the RAFT. It's really about a process that begins with reconciliation. And um, reconciliation, what's important to remember is that one person cannot reconcile uh, a broken relationship. One person can do certain things. That you can do forgiveness. You can do a process, or you can forgive or ask for forgiveness, depending on what side of the, what's taken place. There are different cultural ways and things to sort of uh, offer peace. Um, if trust has been broken, you can even do some of the hard work to rebuild some of that trust. Um, but it basically says, hey, our relationship, you know, matters. It matters, and it's not in a healthy place right now. And before we leave, I'd like to do whatever we can, to put that back together. And so the like, yeah, I teach actually. I just taught this at the uh, at a conference for international schools that host international students, and
Sure.
saying,
And
hey,
so the RAFT model, just to clarify, has to
yeah,
do with interpersonal communication. And so this is something that it would be good for people to use in uh, doing some repair work, perhaps on relationships. I'm trying to think for people who have not heard of the RAFT before, just to give them a little bit of
mhm,
framework as to how to apply it.
yeah, yeah. Let me run through the acronym. So the first is that internal work, reconciliation. The second piece, it's not so much the communication exactly, but well, this one actually is. You're right. Affirmations is the A, and affirmations is about relationships and about letting people know what they mean to us, and again, setting us up for leaving well, but also staying connected where we want to, where we can. So that's reconciliation, affirmation. Then the F is farewells, how to say goodbyes and how to do the process of goodbyes. Um, and there can start to be grief in there. Some people process grief ahead of time, like you're saying, like the nerves and all of that. Some people process grief in the moment of the loss. It's the very teary getting on the plane process, and some people wait, kind of store it inside. That's my usual method. Is I mean, I don't intentionally do it, but I just kind of get through the things, pay attention, and then on the far side, when it can kind of let down, then I do my mourning. So that's the farewells, and then the T is to think destination. It's about the work. I think C.S. Lewis wrote this probably, but doing the work of worry. It's not that we want to worry, but there's some work involved in looking ahead, saying, okay, what about? What do I need to, what do I need to know? What do I need to prepare? Who do I need to communicate to? Who's going to pick us up from the airport? All those things.
Yeah.
So, and so that's part of that pre-leaving work. That can also be interpersonal because as a family or single couple begins to, or a student, right, going off by themselves to university, as they begin to pull away toward that next place, it can feel lonely. It can feel like other people are going ahead with the plans for next year and all those things are happening. Um, and the interpersonal part of that is to have some buddies who are either also going, so you're in the same boat, or you've just been really close and they're interested in, yeah, what is happening next for you and how can I pray for you and all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Run through those words one more time again. So we've got R is reconciliation,
Hmm?
A is
A,
affirmation.
uh-huh. And so that's your meals and your parties and it's important. I always say that, not only do you celebrate others, but let them celebrate you. Sometimes that is, for certain ones of us, that is the hardest part, to just be and let them do the surprise parties or invite you out to dinner or, so allow that to happen. That's important. Even written ones, some people, yeah, it's really important to have pictures and writing. And so there's ways to mark that affirmations and then farewells,
Farewells.
eyes,
And
and then the
T's.
think destination.
And destination. Okay. This is really practical because you're talking about actual things that you can do. But then it also acknowledges ways that you will feel. And each one of those has an interpersonal connection. You can't do any of those in isolation. So this is something that someone could put into place before they head back to their
Yeah.
passport country. And then also as they are moving from their passport country back to wherever they're from, or really on either side of the trip, because you're farewelling on both sides. You're preparing on both sides.
Yes.
So it's a
Yeah.
process.
And the farewell, you think about it, sometimes that immediately we think people, you have to farewell people. And it's also important, because place is important, etcetera. So to say goodbye to, it's the P list. It's the people, places that are important, pets, oftentimes, and for our kids, and for us too, but sometimes for our kids, there's a really tight bonding with their pets, with our pets. And sometimes in the flurry of things, parents can kind of forget and be like, "Oh, I gave away your iguana because we're going getting on the plane next week," and it just creates havoc. Um, or the stories of we're trying to find a good place, for the dog because we can't take the dog with us. And the kids are like, "Why can't we take the dog?" You know, um, and so all of that to work through. Pay and then the last P that's kind of the official one in the book is possessions. Is again, sometimes there are attachments, there are memories connected to a bicycle or to the play shed or to the treehouse, and uh, so the things that can't go with us, to do a little ceremony, to think about what do I want to do with this thing. I told a story about giving away a green giant mountain bike in China because we didn't have a car. And so most of us on the team didn't have cars. So we did a lot of biking. And this was the one bike that had not been stolen. I lost maybe six bikes. One, it only took like an hour and a half. I had just bought it and changed it to the post outside. And it came home. I mean, it came out of the apartment and there's the chain lying on the ground. And sometime, yeah, I can talk about what I did and what I regretted after that. But this bike, it was very special, and I thought, "Okay, what do I wanna do with this bike? Yeah, I could sell it." And then I thought about the student who I knew had just had his bike stolen. This is fairly common. So, I set up a thing and gave him the bike and, kind of made a pronouncement over it and blessed him in his city riding and all that. And it was really neat. It was really fun. Um, I also this is not a P, it's not in the book, it's something I've been thinking about more recently, is experiences, so I like, how do you capture that? It could be it's not just the food at this restaurant, but it's going and sitting on the heated floor of that Korean, hole in the wall,
Yeah.
that's going out for street food, or it's going to to the bowling alley with the archery range next to it and having one more, time. Or, so there are, are those linked to places and things? Yes, but it's also the experiences that were important. We want to have one more time and absolutely do these things, start planning them months before. Quick story. One of my son's desires before we left China was to visit a place that in the first 5 or 6 years of our time, the whole team had gone to, piled on train and buses, and trains, and buses again. Is a place called Beidaihe, and it's on the coast north, kind of a Russian feeling city in China. And it was a vacation spot. So he said, the last 3 years we haven't gone back there as a team. We went to new places. So that's the place I want to go back to. Well, we were really glad that he told us that we started planning that, 10 months ahead. You're looking at the calendar and saying, okay, I think here's where we can take that trip. Um, so, you know, families often ask, well, what if I'm just hearing this and I'm leaving next week? Do all the things that you can, make that list, make it a priority, get to those people, get to those places, have those last meals, take pictures, and say those goodbyes.
I really, really like that you mentioned those, Michael, that list of P's because and I love that you went beyond people, and got into even things like places and possessions because it's funny the things that grab you emotionally. We're talking about mental and emotional preparation. And it's funny how you just attach to just seemingly odd things. Um, I'm just even listening to you having things pop up in my memory, thinking how every year when we would head back here where we're now living, I always wanted to visit my college campus. I would think about it, I would dream about it, and then we would come here and there would never be enough time and we wouldn't do it. And there was always like this missing sadness in my heart that we hadn't been able to do that. And finally the last year we did. And it was so satisfying. And I noticed for Danny, for my husband, for my girls, they also kind of had these weird little things that they would miss. And obviously you cannot fulfill everyone's wishes or desires on everything, but maybe it's, going to Target. And like wandering the end caps. I just loved to go walk in circles around Target. I felt like something happened to me when I was there. And for somebody else, it might be Walmart. I know Target's kind of controversial right now, but like a store or a place or like you said, a random seeming possession, and somehow it carries this tremendous amount of meaning. And we kind of did this. I would say the more times we went back in the beginning, we made it all about who we needed to see and we ran ourselves ragged. But we kind of started to have conversations as a family. What would be really meaningful to you? What's something that's very important to you? Or like when we went back to Peru, I just wanted to see my dentist. I really love her and I just wanted to see her. And yes, I could get my teeth cleaned in
Right.
Minnesota, but something in me just needed to see her and filled this place in my heart.
Love that.
But it's
Mhm.
fascinating to see what your kids say too. And again, not that you can fulfill every wish and desire and need, but it is interesting to mine what's going on in the mind and the heart of each one of us and what is something that would be comforting to us maybe in a way as we make this trip back.
Right.
What a great list.
Yeah. And as you said, sometimes we don't even really know ourselves until we sit with it for a bit. What's that meaningful thing to do, or that person I've just got to see. No, they're not a close friend, but um, I'm picturing a Uyghur uh, couple. So Uyghurs Northwest China, but they were all the way east, had with a food cart, and it was like Saturday morning thing. And wasn't the only time I'll admit going there um, for Dabing Jidan, s- but almost, I don't know, many, many, many Saturdays, and they became friends. And I thought, I can't leave until I find them, because sometimes their cart would move different places, till I find them and order one last time and tell them how much I appreciate them and love their food and that we're on our way out of China. Um, I didn't even realize that until I sat with it. And so same for our kids. And when our kids can prioritize those things, we're like, here are 8 things I'd like to do, but oh my goodness, this is the one, or these are the two, that are super important. That's really helpful for parents as well ahead of time.
Ahead of time, yes. And it
Mhm.
can really change from year to year. I mean, like you said, there's just some years where you just feel this need to experience something, to smell something, to taste something, to see someone, and it's so often not logical. And so there's the big rocks, sure, of who do we need to see in terms of our fundraising and who do we need to see in terms of family and close friends. But I like kind of what you're saying about making space for some of those other, maybe surprising things that fill your soul in a very, very deep way. So we've kind of talked through, okay, some of the practical steps there. What are some things families or individuals or parents could do to prepare their hearts, maybe in conversations they have with their kids or with
Mhm.
family members?
I think expectations can be there
Hmm.
and really bring up a lot of feeling. Um, that wasn't a mistake. Who's going to pick us up from the airport? Because that can be a question like that. Who's going to meet us? Who we're going to stay with first, or we're going to see first, um, can be linked to a deeper. Has anybody missed us? You know, have we?
Yeah.
Do they want to? Do they want to? Do they reconnect? Um, and this was harder before. Before the internet and before Zoom and so many ways to connect with people. And being face to face is still different. And so, um, that that sense of, sure, you can't ask the question like, "Hey, we're coming back. Have you missed us, and will you be there for us?" That's a little awkward.
Right.
Um, but this is the idea of affirmations. You can begin with your side. "Hey, we have really missed you, and we're really looking forward to getting together. Here's our schedule. Does this fit?" And sometimes the disappointment and the pain can come from, "Oh, yeah, the person who came to pick us up was the person who drew this short straw, and we had to throw ourselves, into this double cab and our gear into the back of this dirty pickup truck, and, like, how did that happen?" It's and I'm not making that up. That's real.
Oh, I
So
believe you. And that disappointment that you're bringing up is huge because there are times where there's this piece of you that feels, okay, I have bought this really expensive plane ticket back to where you are at and like altered my life. And then people sometimes don't want to rearrange their schedule to see you. And it can feel hurtful. It can feel disappointing. I know a phrase sometimes we would say in our family is some people actually miss us. Some people just miss the idea of us.
oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
mm,
And it's painful, but unfortunately, I think it is true to some degree. And we had to get to be able to be able to say that without feeling the intense pain of it. Because sometimes somebody can remain a really close friend for a lot of years, and then with time it fades away. Sometimes somebody who you think was really close, you realize wasn't. And so you want to be tempted to jump into either judgment or anger or sadness. Not that you can't feel any of those things, because let's be real, we feel, we're people, we're humans.
that's
But what do I do with those? Am I going to sit in this place of rejection or disappointment or anger? Or am I going to, as another friend always says, go where you're celebrated? All right. So if this one's not going to work out, where's a space where somebody would like to see me? And how can we find that magic place where I want to see them and they want to see me?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And I think too, sometimes the sense, of what folks are doing overseas, uh, whether it's a pain, a difficulty, life is hard, kind of thing, there is a kind of stigma that international travel is glamorous. So this idea of like, oh, well, you're like flitting around the world, and now you've come here and you want us to drop everything can be a feeling. I've talked some of this stuff out
True.
with and said, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I kind of get that. After like planes, trains, automobiles, all these, ways, we got to one house and basically the message was like, and they, knew we were coming and we thought it was very, like, oh yeah, yeah, please come. Was like, well, you could do something useful and mow the lawn. And I was like, yeah, of course, sure. Yep. You
Wow.
know, I've traveled for 4 days to be here. And yes, I can sit the riding mower and mow the lawn. So, because what I really wanted to communicate was not like, "Hey, I'm here, I'm special, let's have a party for me." But
Exactly.
was, "I've missed you and I wanna connect, and if that's what connecting looks like, then sure, I'll mow the grass, that's great." Afterwards, like, we cook out, and so and that's the way it worked, and it was great. Sometimes it is easy for folks, traveling and going through COVID restrictions and all this to get back to their passport country and think, we're the ones who've been having a hard time. When the reality is everybody's been having a hard time, right? And
Yes.
and our mantra became grace to self, grace to others, grace to self, grace to others. So it's important to remember that sometimes people's behavior, it's not that it's unwelcoming. It just may be that they're overwhelmed. And so that idea of expectations, suspending a bit our judgment, until we can, till we can really find out is important. Um, number of times in our travels back and forth from overseas, we found that, yeah, that friends and or family were in really tough spots. Uh, so giving that time is important, and the communication ahead can also be, really helpful. That's that T of think destination.
That's a great point because I think sometimes when we're on the field and kind of that missionary to culture, I'm helping mindset, we're like, I am helping, I'm helping, I'm helping. And then there's something about going back to your passport country where you're like, it's time for me to receive now. Like, I need some things. And it can be jarring when you go back and realize people in your passport country, they have needs just as much, different kinds of needs, perhaps. But I remember one year going back and our 3 weeks back, we encountered people in such intense
Mhm,
places that we
mhm,
ended up doing kind of just like almost pastoral counseling for 3 weeks straight. And we went back, I think, more exhausted than when we came. And I think, to your point, it's that mental preparation. So when I'm going back, I'm not going back just to receive and get refreshed. I am going back to give and, yes, to make spaces to get refreshed. Also, you had kind of brought up where you land, like who picks you up and who you stay with. I think that's key too, because who you stay with, they're going to treat you and react to you differently. And sometimes those emotions hit you in such big ways when you get back. Sometimes you feel overwhelmed with excitement. Sometimes you just want to cry for like 3 days. Sometimes you feel angry. If you bring in kids with you, you have no control, especially if they're younger, how they're going to react. So you can be in this home, think, and your kids can just be acting out for obvious reasons. They've gone through a lot. And you
yeah.
can feel really embarrassed as a parent trying to control their behavior so people don't think poorly of you. So it's a lot of feelings. And so knowing where you're landing, who you're with, even having honest conversations with your hosts. Hey, this is what we're going through right now. I
Yeah.
mean, what would be some thoughts you have around that? How can you prepare the people that you're staying with to
Mm.
experience the gloriousness of all of you?
Wow. I think the first thing that I would say to that is, if there is a way, church housing, mission housing, Airbnb, if there's a way for a family to have their own space, at least for a week, in transition, that's a really good idea. Now, I mean, sometimes it's a landing at a place where grandma and grandpa are going to, pamper everybody. The expectation is there, the expectation is met, they want to do this. You can fall apart, in their backyard kind of idea, and it's okay. But yeah, to have the weight of trying to outwardly conform or even perform. I know a lot of MKs, a lot of TCKs feel that in those situations there are behaviors that they are supposed to
Yeah.
um, demonstrate, and that it does feel like a performance. So when can they be off camera? When can they be just themselves? And you're right. There's so much that has happened, including and depending on where someone is left. Um, so one way of preparing people is, yeah, it is ahead being honest about what you need. You know, hey, this may sound harsh, but for the first week, we need our own space. Um, we'd like it to be somewhere on the water where we could just sleep and eat, and and relax, um, and catch up with jet lag. That's another piece.
Yeah.
Uh, but also knowing the situation. Is this a predetermined coming and going, or was it sudden? Did you have a chance to, say goodbye, or were you airlifted out, or
Yes.
barred from your city? I had friends during COVID in Wuhan who, one friend in particular, we spent some time coaching together, where he had um, taken a trip with students and staff out of country, out of China. COVID hit, Wuhan lockdown, and he was locked out of his city at the on the year that he was returning, permanently, semi-permanently to the US.
Oh my.
So his, people on the other end, that's really helpful for them to know. I just spent, he was in another country, taking care of all these kids who couldn't go home, trying to make sure they got on flights to family, and that communicating with family who were locked in Wuhan, etc. I mean, just crazy things. And so he had all that stress, and then he couldn't go back to his apartment. He couldn't go back and say goodbyes. Um, you know, they shut
Wow.
his things. So right, so that's a more intense case, but it highlights the fact that if the folks that you're going to don't know where you're coming from, it's hard for them to adjust to what you need. Yeah, if someone can't stay on their own for that first period, staying with folks who are really knowing, loving. I often recommend, like, if if you can, if three people volunteer to house you, and one of them is a retired missionary couple, go there. Right?
Yes.
Other people who understand. You don't have to fill in all the backstory necessarily. So yeah, and people who've seen you at your best and worst. It's really great. I call these the bridge relationships. Folks who have been with you on both sides of the um, home host home host cultures and places. When you can sit with people and they can say, how is so and so, your friend who just became a believer, and or did that, did COVID close down that open air market we went to, or has a connection to place and people and culture that you're coming from. That can be a beautiful thing, and it's can be very affirming, can be really great for kids to have that, to say you didn't make this up, and you didn't, because even when I say that, when I say you didn't make this up, there have been cases where families have, shown up in a small rural place back in their passport country, and kids at school have been accused of lying for telling some of their stories, and parents have been called in, etc. And the parents said, yeah, actually, they aren't lying. We did live in this situation, and this did happen. And now can you apologize to my child? So yeah, so that when people can connect, there can be a heart connection with that as well. Um, just that, hey, where we're coming from. Yeah,
Absolutely.
those are some main things with preparing heart. Some of it is really good communication.
Yeah, and you shared some great, I think, general strategies, like, even making me think more in terms of when you make a trip like that, being really intentional about where you're going to stay. And if you cannot find a good place to stay, maybe even putting a pause and thinking through. One thing I didn't realize, gratefully, we had my parents always to stay with when we came up. But I know, had we not, I'm not sure exactly where we would have stayed. And I've realized there are a lot of people and places in the US who are willing to house missionaries and house them well. There's even people who have nonprofits who
Yes,
are willing
right.
to donate their time with Airbnbs. There are people who have missionaries come on and they happen to also be counselors and they'll counsel you while you're there. There's a
Yeah.
lot more available, I think, than we know about. Sometimes as independent missionaries, I know at modern day we have a lot of independent missionaries. Whereas if you're with an agency, maybe you're more aware. So maybe it's taking the time to do that research. And I'll put some links out there as well on the newsletter that I send out, and on this podcast page. But it's great for people to take the time to really think through strategically, where am I going to stay? Because that's a pretty big game changer. Where you stay, that intake place, is going to set the tone. And then just thinking through, maybe it's meeting with somebody who's a coach. Like I know you're a coach, or meeting with somebody else who specializes in transitions or missions, or cross-cultural things, and getting together a plan for your family. What can we do that will bring the greatest success for our family? But sometimes the extent of our plan is, I know I need to go to this church, this church, this church, and this church, see this family member, and this friends. And those are kind of the big rocks. And we build our trip around that. And maybe that's not what our family needs. It's part of what we need, but we need things like you mentioned in the beginning, those little heart things, or those refresh things, or things that we think we don't have time for, when in reality, we desperately need them. We've got to have that intake to be able to go forward. So you have shared a ton of practical things. I'm thinking, if I'm listening to this and I'm getting ready for a trip, I'm ready to sit down and have a conversation and start putting together a plan. So thank you for everything you shared today, Michael. This was fantastic.
You're welcome. Can I make one more plug?
Oh, please do.
Just that, along with coaching, I think that one of the best movements that's come in third culture, cross-cultural travel, global workers for care has been the process of debriefing. And I do some on my own. I've worked with a couple different organizations. I'm currently also freelancing for TCK training, and there's quite a would you say a stable? That's not quite the right word, but that's what came to mind. There is an excellent group of debriefers working with TCK training, and that'll do a couple of possible things. You can come to your place, your home. I have met family in transition. We did meet up at a church, and so, but it could, we can come to you, and it's a 2-day intensive. There are also options for doing debriefing on Zoom, and there are a number of, and I feel like they're increasing, the ones I'm seeing, of where you can go 4 days, 6 days, 10 days. And if there's an intensive need for counseling and rest and healing, there are groups like Alongside, where it's like either, I think, like 10-day or 3-week even,
Yeah.
programs for that. So you can receive what you need. Those resources are out there, and I think that what we're seeing in the improvement of people's, just of their physical and mental and emotional health, when they're able to go through a debriefing process to process where they have been and look to the future, it's making a really big difference.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because the whole time I was a missionary, I never heard the word debrief. I found out about debriefing after I had been back for a year. And I'm telling you, that would have been really helpful. At that point, I did plug into kind of a transition seminar that walked me through, and it was a game changer. And we sent our daughter to one with Barnabas. So there is, like you said, a lot of different options depending on what it is people need, depending on if they want to go somewhere, whether they want to do it virtually, whether they want to weave it into, for mine, I just made it a part of my day-to-day life. But it's huge, and we just don't think we need those things. I think sometimes we think we're tougher than we are, and we are really tough. I mean, if you're a missionary listening, I'm not taking away from your toughness. You're amazing. But oh my goodness,
Yeah.
we need someone to love us and walk us through those things, because otherwise they'll come and kind of rear their head and knock us down later, and we don't know what's going on. So it doesn't mean that we are not tough. It just means that we are human. And I think all of us can agree that, yes, we are very, very, very human. So thank you for mentioning that, Michael. And again, just can't thank you enough for all that you shared today, just sharing from the richness of your experience. I know we could have talked about 1,000 more things, and I think I may have to have you back on again if you're willing, because yeah, there's a lot of more places I would want to go, but hopefully people can review that, look over the raft that we talked about, some of the different resources that were mentioned, think about how they want to plan things for their family, and prepare mentally, prepare their plans, and prepare their heart for whatever it is they have next. And read Third Culture Kids.
And it really has a lot of helpful stuff, and you don't have to read it cover to cover. It was this version, the third version, was built so that you could pull out the pieces that you need that pertain to you. So
It is. And I
that
have the audiobook, and I have to say it's well read. I'm really picky with audiobooks, and it's super well read. So that's a version I've really enjoyed as well.
great. Well, so good to talk to you today.
Yes. Thanks again, Michael. And for everybody listening, make sure to tune in for our next episode.